Welcome to Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. My name is Amber Ireland, and I'm here with my co-host, Jill Bucaro. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Guided by Third Wheel. Today, Amber and I decided that we are going to talk about forgiveness. And I think truly forgiveness has become a somewhat controversial, I don't know if controversial is the right way, topic, but a topic that people have a lot of opinions on. Mm-hmm. I know in some of the podcasts I listen to and some of the self-helpy kind of books that I read, different people have different feelings about forgiveness, right? Some people think, yes, we need to forgive no matter what. A lot of people say we're only hurting ourselves when we don't forgive. And I think there's also a lot of people now that are saying, like, forgiveness is not required, right. That this kind of weird moral mandate, I think, that we have culturally, that we need to forgive people. I see a lot of people pushing back up against that. I do not need to forgive people for what they have done. And I respect all of those opinions. I feel like I kind of oscillate between them. And I think we want to talk about that, but we also want to talk about forgiving ourselves.
Yeah.
I know for me, and Amber, you feel the same way because we talked about it before, I actually don't typically have a hard time forgiving people.
Yeah.
And I think probably for a long time, I forgave people quickly in a somewhat codependent way. Like, hurt me more. That feels normal to me. But even now, I feel like I can forgive people and maintain my boundaries and wish them all the best. But I do really struggle to forgive myself for mistakes that I have made, for things I wish I would have done differently, for maybe not healing on the timeline that I would have liked myself to heal on, those types of things. So where do you sit with forgiveness?
I am definitely the same. Often easier for me to forgive someone else than it is for me to forgive myself. Maybe it's because I've reflected on my own human journey that I can very quickly see when someone does something that I don't like, that they just aren't there yet, right? Maybe this was the best choice that they could make at this point in time. This was a less healed version of themselves, right? But I think also I've come to a place where that forgiveness is not acceptance. I'm going to forgive you for this so that I can let it go, because I don't want to hold on to it any longer. I don't want to hold on to this anger and resentment and whatever, because that's taking up space for me. And so I can forgive you and set that down, but it does not mean that I want to let you back into my life or continue on in a relationship with you or anything like that. Because forgiveness to me doesn't necessarily mean that acceptance piece or reconciliation or anything like that. It just means that I want to set down these feelings that I have about the situation and about you, and just see you as the human being that you are, the flawed human being that we all are, and say, good luck. I wish you well. And I'm not going to hold this anger for you on your journey. And I'm willing to just move on without you at this point. Forgiving myself is much harder because I hold myself to almost impossible standards.
Yes.
Right? So I don't hold myself to that human standard to say, yes, I'm flawed. I'm like, well, yes, you're flawed. And also you shouldn't be.
And why? Yes.
And why? And so it's harder for me to forgive myself. And I think sometimes I've found with forgiving other people, especially people that I'm in relationship with, there's two sides of every story, right?
Sure.
And sometimes in that forgiving someone else, I also have to forgive myself for the way that I showed up or how long I let that go on or how I participated in it. And that sometimes is harder to look within and say, oh, you had a part in this too. And can I forgive myself for not knowing better? Can I forgive myself? Can I forgive my less healed self?
Yes.
My younger self?
Yes.
Can I forgive that person for not knowing, even though now I know and now I wouldn't do it, but I'm still like holding myself to task over here because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yes. I think I know what you're saying, because I have definitely felt some frustration with myself looking back, being like, Jill, I can't believe you let somebody treat you like that. I can't believe you participated in something that toxic. I can't believe you didn't see the writing on the wall because you couldn't then, but now I could, and you stayed in it.
Right.
And I think it's like irritation, a frustration with myself. Like you said, like, why didn't you know better? You're not allowed to be flawed. You're not allowed to have learning curves and things like that. One of the gifts of being a social worker, which you are and I am, is that we are taught, and we have to learn on the job and able to stay in it, this empathy, right?
Right.
We are very good at putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And I think that works really well with clients. That works really well with irritating colleagues and bosses and things of that nature. Because I think that we know that most of the time people are just doing the best that they can with the baggage that they're carrying.
Right.
I'm not excusing their actions, right? Because sometimes their baggage and their trauma and their bullshit is causing them to be really ugly, right? To other people, to me, you know, to show up in spaces in a really toxic and unhealthy way. But I think because of our orientation and our profession, we're able to say, okay, I know that the behavior is not right, but I can see the why behind it. And I wonder if that, at least for you and I, like makes it an easier avenue to that forgiveness piece.
Yeah.
But I also think conversely, I would have that empathy for that person. I would be like, oh, I think this is probably why they're treating me like shit, right? These are the things that I think are bouncing around in their head. These are the things that they're struggling with because they've disclosed them to me. You know, the behavior makes sense. And it took me a long time to be able to say the behavior makes sense. I don't think they're waking up each morning and saying, man, what can I do to fuck Jill's life up today? But still what they're doing is not okay. And I don't have to engage with it or entertain it.
Right.
That last piece was the piece it took me a while to get to. And to me, that is the sweet spot of forgiveness, right? Is you can have some empathy for people. You can maybe or maybe not understand why they're doing it, but you can assume that most people are basically good and they're not thinking like, how can I rain terror down upon the people closest to me? And then you can say, but I'm not going to subject myself to that.
Right.
And on I press.
Yeah. I see it as the difference between there's someone that you maybe were in relationship with or still are that you don't like. Something has happened. There has been some kind of break there. You don't like them. They've treated you some kind of way. There's been something that's happened, right? And you see them. It's the difference between seeing them and having all that hatred and, you know, resentment and all of that rise up in you. Or you see them and you're like, oh, I hope they're doing better than they used to be doing.
Yes.
And you move on.
Yes. It's almost that like almost kind of radical acceptance piece, right? I remember my old boss, he had said to me one time, and people say this all the time, but he had said, Jill, like when people show you who they are, believe them. Believe them. If that's the way they're going to act, like that's who they are in this moment.
Right.
Right. And back, you know, with my codependent hat on, I'd be like, oh, but maybe they were having a bad day, or maybe I just need to try harder or prove myself more, like show them that I'm trustworthy, you know, or all these different things, right? And then I think there's the complete opposite of that, where you move into a space of like, man, these motherfuckers showed me who they were, and how dare they be that way, right? How dare they show up in the world that way? How can they live with themselves being so terrible? Da 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 da. There's almost this acceptance piece of, yeah, this is how this person is showing up. And that is not great. Not something I want to be around. But to your point, I can't be around it right now. I hope it gets better for them, because what a terrible way to go about being in this world. I can't attach any emotional energy to it anymore. Whether it's like the angry, resentful emotional energy, or the how can I twist myself into a pretzel to help heal somebody so they're nice to me, codependent emotional energy.
Right.
It's just like, to me, the happy medium is letting go of the energy altogether.
Right. You talked about two different kinds of people. How dare you show up in the world this way? Why would anybody act this way? And then the other people who are like, well, but maybe we can piece this together. And I think it has to do with you. It has to do with yourself and how you view yourself and how you are willing to look at your life. The people that are, how dare anybody ever do this, probably also look at their own life and are not willing to look at the fact that they are flawed. And if they are looking at that, they are denouncing it. And they're not like, this is part of who I am. I'm going to accept that I'm growing. They denounce it. And they say those things were bad. And they hold themselves at task for it. So they're going to hold everyone else at task for that. And then the people on the other side that are like, oh, but you know, people will come along and maybe I can help them. Those generally are people who are interested in their own personal growth. And we forget that not everyone does that.
Yes.
So we just assume that I'm invested in growing and learning, and I know that I haven't always been great, and I'm growing into the person that I want to be. Certainly this person's going to want to do that. Let me just hold their hand and walk along this journey. And sometimes that works, right? Sometimes you find people that are also journeying too, and you can walk together for a little bit. But it doesn't normally happen that way. It happens in the way where you both are expressing that to one another and decide to do it together, not somebody shows up in a shitty way and you convince them to get on the journey.
Exactly. Because that's what you're describing is like codependent behavior, right? This person is really showing no interest or investment in changing their behavior. But if I agree to be their emotional punching bag or their emotional doormat or their emotional whatever, maybe I can persuade them, which is somewhat manipulative, right?
Oh, yeah.
To engage in a change journey.
Yeah.
Yes. It's very middle pathy. What we're talking about is to have some empathy and understanding for the people that, show up like Tasmanian devils and whirlwind into your life. But to also say, hey, you can't do that here, right? You can't do that to me. Not like to shame somebody. You're a terrible person. How dare you think you can do this? Right. But just to be like, hey, I don't appreciate that behavior.
I'm not going to participate in it.
I'm not going to participate.
Because all you can do is say, I don't like it and I'm not going to participate. You can't say you can't do that because they absolutely can.
No. Yeah, they absolutely can. But you can say, I'm not going to entertain that.
Right.
So please go elsewhere,
And that's the difference. When you get into a space where you've done a little bit of your own work, where you're able to look at your own life and your own experiences and recognize in someone else the same humanness that you have. This person's running around like a Tasmanian devil. I remember when I did that. I remember when I acted in similar ways, right? And you can have some empathy for that person. Doesn't mean you need to go fix them. It's just like, oh, I see where you are on your path. We are not aligned. So I'm going to keep it moving. And I hope you get where you need to go.
Right, and I wish you all the best. I had an interesting thing happen to me about a month ago. I was just derping along as I was out of town, and I get a text from somebody who I had asked over 2 years ago to just, please don't text me anymore, right?
Please lose my number.
Please lose my number. I had drawn a boundary because I was struggling to engage with that person in a healthy way. What we had going on was not healthy, not going anywhere productive. There was no reason for us to talk. And he had circled around again, and I was just in a firm way that I don't usually do, right? In a strange like flicker of healthy behavior. And I had some support, but I was just like, hey, listen, I'm not going to fight about why or why not you're reaching out, but please don't. Please lose my number. And he was understood. So on we press for 30 some months, and I get a reach out, and I truly think it was kind-hearted, right? It was very much hope you're doing well, definitely some tinges. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was apologetic in nature, right? I kind of messed up. I feel some regret about what I did, right? Or how I engaged. Acknowledged that I had asked him not to reach out. It was a nice text. It was really nice. A little bit of a boundary crossing because I said don't reach out and you are, but whatever. Right. And I was like, that's sweet. And I sat on it because I kind of acknowledged the good behavior. And I sat there and I was like, I look back at the history. I just don't know that we have the ability to engage in a healthy way. And I wanted to acknowledge, yes, I forgive you, but I just feel like responding is opening up the can of worms, right? And so I think we also have to recognize, so long story short, I have not responded. And I'm not going to, because now it's been like 4 weeks and that would be really fucking weird. I think sometimes we also have to acknowledge in a forgiveness situation where we maybe don't have the tools or the ability or the history is too much that we cannot circle back to that space. And I'm not mad at him. I'm not resentful. I truly, from the bottom of my heart, hope that he finds some peace and connection in his life.
Yeah.
I really, really do. But I just don't think that us engaging in a text conversation is going to help you on your journey or do anything positive for me on my journey.
Right.
Because I think before, a couple years ago, I might have felt this compulsive, wow, he really took a nice step here. I should acknowledge that to show that I too am a good person. Right? And let him know that I forgive. And it's just like...
And then I will case manage this situation.
Right. And then I will...
I'll validate your feelings,
and then
let you know you've
6 months
done
later,
well.
I'm like, why am I having like a weird,
Mark it off your
emotionally
case plan.
toxic fucking text exchange happening? So I think that to me was a nice middle path. I wasn't, who is this motherfucker think he is?
Right.
Da 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 da. And I wasn't, oh my gosh, no biggie. Don't feel bad, because you should feel a little bad.
Yeah.
You should feel bad.
Right.
You were shitty to me.
Yeah.
But it's just the middle path for me in that situation was just, I'm cool, bro.
Yeah.
I wish you all the best.
Yeah. Forgive yourself.
Forgive yourself.
Yeah. That's what it all comes down to, is you forgive yourself. Yeah, I made big mistakes in my life where I've said, I'm sorry, and these are the reasons why I'm sorry. And sometimes you just have to send that out in whatever way, shape, or form you need to send it. Because you feel regret. You want the other person to know that you truly are sorry.
Yes.
But I have never expected to receive back oh, it's okay, or, oh, I forgive you too. No, that's not if I'm going to apologize, I am not going to expect that you also are going to co-sign on my apology. It's not your job to co-sign on my apology.
Yes, that's so true. And I think we need to think about that almost in the conversation of forgiving ourselves or making amends or things like that, is I think when you truly are in a space where you have forgiven yourself and where you're like, I just want to let somebody know with no ulterior motives. Because certainly I have apologized or reached back out to people
in a manipulative
way.
Oh, yeah.
I have, for sure.
And I think that's why when people apologize, oftentimes they may not get a response back, because the other person is going to have a hard time discerning whether or not this is manipulative or if this is genuine, and they don't want to open the door if it is manipulative. And a way to know that an apology is manipulative is if somebody apologizes and then keeps fishing for it's okay. They keep coming back around for it.
Or they're trying to reestablish the connection, or they're trying to weasel back in. And I think in those situations, one, if you are the person extending the apology, if you have an ulterior motive, then you're not ready to apologize yet.
Right.
Because you have clearly not forgiven yourself, and you are not stopping the behavior.
Right.
You're re-engaging in the behavior. And two, conversely, if somebody reaches out to you and you're not sure if it's manipulation or if it's genuine, then don't say anything. Because if it's manipulation, don't open the door. And if it's genuine, they don't give a shit if you respond or not.
Right.
If they are truly ready to apologize and move on, then they're not going to have expectations for how you engage.
And I also feel like in times where I've been apologized to, and I've not responded, it's almost better to just have those kind words and to close that door and be like, oh, they do feel bad about what happened.
Yeah.
It's nice that they have come to that realization on their own without me there, without anything, and they realize that maybe this wasn't the best way for them to do it. And I feel like that shows growth. That shows that you are moving forward on your journey. And if I don't engage with you, then I just get to hold on to that, right? As a little nugget of
warmth.
Okay.
And I think, probably not everybody listening to this lives in a smaller city like Dayton, but you would be delusional if you lived in Dayton like Amber and I do and think that you would go the rest of your life without seeing somebody, right?
Like Jesus.
At the grocery store, at a festival, on the street. So I think, to your point, I feel good that if I were to run into this person on the street, that it would be nice. I'd be able to be like, hey, how are you? And he'd be like, I'm good. How are you? And I'd be like, I'm good. And it wouldn't be weird and there wouldn't be tension, because it really, truly does feel like closure. Yeah, it's interesting when we're talking about that piece, because I do think back on times in my life when I've quote unquote apologized, or somebody's reached out to pretend apologize or get pretend closure, and all it was like the next iteration of the toxicity. And I think that happens not only in romantic relationships, relationships. It happens with friendships. It happens with family that we draw boundaries with, you know, because I think sometimes we try to draw a boundary, or we do draw a boundary rather. And we talk about this too. Drawing the boundary is hard. What's harder is maintaining the boundary, right?
Yes.
And so somebody pretend respects it for a little bit. And then they're like, oh, well, I've given her a couple months, or I've given her a couple weeks. You know, I've given her quote unquote space. And she seemed pissed enough when she drew the boundary that if I just try to reach out like normal, she's going to go off or maintain it. But I think a lot of times people use an apology as a boundary crossing. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we have to be aware of that, which I wonder if that's what puts the idea of forgiveness, is why it's kind of a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah.
Because I've tried to quote unquote forgive, or people are seeking quote unquote forgiveness as a way to get back in. And to hurt me some more.
Right. It's just getting clear on what forgiveness actually means to you, because I don't think forgiveness is a bad thing in any way, shape, or form, as long as you understand what forgiveness actually means to you. And that forgiveness means I'm going to lay down this anger, this frustration, this resentment that I'm carrying around. Because when we carry around that, whether it's for ourselves or someone else, it just starts to influence how we see the world and how we interact.
Yes.
It just sits there and festers and festers and festers, and nobody wants that. Put that down. Figure out a way to forgive, whether it's someone else or just forgiving yourself for not being who you are today, not knowing the things you didn't know.
Yes.
And being able to move forward in that way without all the regret and resentment when you look back. Because I find that to be the hardest thing for me. I talk to other people that are my age that have had, they've been on the earth the same amount of time, and their path seems to be normal. I grew up, I went to school, I got a job, I got married, I had some children, whatever. A lot of things the same, like they live in the same place and they grew up in the same area and they have similar friends that they had when they were kids. And in that regard, I feel like I've lived 5 lifetimes in this 45 years, because my life has changed so drastically so many times in my life.
Yeah.
And I look back sometimes at the younger version of myself, the more unhealed version of myself, and I will hold her to task. Why did you do that? Why did you think that that was a good idea? Look at all of the things that this has screwed up for you, And then I have to remember that person had no idea that I was going to ever be as good as I am today. She had no idea. She couldn't even imagine what that was going to look like.
What that emotional stability and confidence and all of that would look like. That's the paradox of it. I was having this conversation with someone and we were talking about parents, right? And he was like, I feel like my parents did the best they could with what they had. And I believe that is true. And I push back on that a little bit, because I'm always really good at standing up for other people and not for myself. So I'm like, here's and I will hold them accountable. And I said, I think it's possible for you to do the best that you could with what you had, but that you still fell short.
Yeah.
For some people. Yeah. Both those things can be true. You can have parents that did the best they could with what they had, but it did not meet your emotional and physical needs as a child. You can have a partner that, because of their trauma and their stuff, they are doing the best they could with what they had, and it's not enough for you. Both of those things can be true. And I think there is a level of forgiveness you have to have, because otherwise you're walking around in denial, low-key splintering. I can't be mad at my parents because they did the best that they could. Well, no, you can have some feelings about the fact that they didn't meet your needs. But you can also empathize with them and forgive them, because truly they were doing their best. And that is where, and I know people think I have like this Pollyanna view of the world, but I know there are people that do really bad things, but I really truly think that people show up in this space, in this world, and they're doing the best they fucking can. But again, some people's best is not enough for you. And you need to forgive them for not being able to give you what they should have, what you deserve. And then you got to move on.
It's harder when you think about your own childhood, because as an adult, you get in relationships with people. Generally, it's a choice. So you also have that piece of forgiveness for yourself to be like, why didn't I see this and get out of
Why
this
didn't I get out?
faster? Right? Why did I allow this to happen to me? Because you did play a part there. But when you're a kid, you're born into this family.
You got no choice.
And you got no choice. They're just there. That's your people. You can't really be like, oh, let me get myself out of here. And I mean, as kids, there is some choice there, but it's not what you have as an adult. And like you said, sometimes your parents and your caregivers, they're doing the best they can do, but it's not what you need, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's harder to look at that than it is when you're an adult, because you didn't have a choice and you're like, but there was nothing I could do. And I just had, just had to deal with this and whatnot. But I also recognize, as being someone who was parented and being a parent, now I see both sides of that fence. I can have more empathy for my parents to say, you were also children at one point and you lived through whatever that parenting looked like, and that was all you had to bring into my life, right? And so you were doing the best you could, and you probably changed things in the way that you were parented to reflect what you thought that you were missing.
Yeah.
Right? And so I did get the best that you could give me, but some of it wasn't enough. Some of it was hurtful. But at the end of the day, I became an adult. I was able not at the point I would have liked to, but later on, able to reflect on that and say, like, these are things that I need to let go of. I didn't create these things. And this is how I'm going to move forward in my life to try not to carry that on as a modality of how I am going to interact in the world.
Right. And I think, like you said, a lot of times those realizations come, we think, too little too late, right? Like, oh God, how many times have I said, I wish I knew the things I knew now 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But then I think, full circle, that's where we get into the space where we have to forgive ourselves because we just weren't there yet.
No. I would never be where I am today had I not had all the experiences that I had. I had to learn those lessons. I was not born innately with all of this. There was some learning that had to happen there. And so being able to forgive yourself for having to learn, right? Which sounds crazy, but that's what it comes down to.
But we get irritated with ourselves because we had to learn.
Why didn't you already know? Why wasn't I born into a family that did things differently? Why didn't I get this instead of that? And you didn't. And that was what it was, and you needed to,
right.
And you needed to learn these lessons. So
it is. It's that radical acceptance. It definitely is. It's like, well, this is what it is. This is where you are. And how are you take this knowledge and move forward and draw the boundaries you need to draw so that you don't get into a space where you are continuing to let people hurt you.
And I was talking to you about this before the podcast. I've been working on this forgiveness of myself and the things that I have done and experienced throughout my life for a while now. Like, I recognize that there are ways I showed up in the world that now are not in alignment with who I am. And I look back with, some regret and some irritation and those types of things. But today, as I was meditating and thinking about forgiveness and how forgiveness shows up in my life, I realized that sometimes I just hold myself to task because I'm older. I'm looking back at my 35-year-old self and I'm mad my body doesn't do what my 35-year-old body does at 45. And it's like, I've got to forgive that too. I've got to forgive the fact that I'm aging, which sounds stupid because it's like, shouldn't you celebrate that? Shouldn't you honor the fact that you got another 10 years in it and you got that extra wisdom and that growth? But there's a part of me that has to forgive not being able to continue to do everything I did when I was 35 because my body is older.
Yes. It's that forgiveness of our quote unquote flaws, right? And just the acceptance of this is where I am today. And I think truly this is the acceptance of this is where we all are today. Right. And I look at this person and I want you to be different and I want me to be different and I want this person to show up differently here. But it's not happening. I've spent a lot of my life throwing a temper tantrum because me and the people around me were not different. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're not behaving differently than who we really were.
Right.
You have to let go of that. Because all that is control and manipulation, right? You have to let go of that. And you have to be like, this is where I am and that's okay. Because I believe, and I know you believe, this is who I am supposed to be at this moment in time. Yeah. These are the people that are supposed to be around me at this moment in time. And, I was saying, we were talking about something else right before this. And I was saying, like, I'm not going to let her off the hook. I'm not going to let her off the hook for this. It is not our job to keep people on the hook.
Right.
It is not our job to create accountability, because I have watched it happen over and over again, that people get what is theirs every single time.
Yes.
The karma is real. What goes around does come around, often in the ways that we do not anticipate or expect, but it is not our job to put ourselves or to keep ourselves or anybody on the hook.
Right.
Because the universe does that for us.
Yeah.
So perhaps I should let her off the hook,
Yeah.
and let it all play out.
Or let her hold her own hook.
Let her,
You know, like, you deal with you. I'm going to deal with me. I'm going to let you know when I'm available for an interaction with you.
Right. Like, you can't do this around me.
Right.
But do what you do, girl.
And that's another piece that I feel like as I get older, I realize that I can't like manipulate and change other people. But if I see somebody on their journey that's doing something that maybe I used to do, or I see that underlying, like, oh, I get it. You just haven't really stepped quite into your power yet. Like, you have it, but you don't know it, and you're still trying to, like, do all these weird manipulative things in order to kind of stand in your truth, right?
Sure.
And I can recognize it as such, and I'm like, okay, well, you'll get there. Now, instead of trying to manipulate that person to get them to where they need to be, where I think they need to be, in the quickness that I think it should happen, I just shine a little light.
Yes.
Give a little bit of, not direction, but just, here's some wisdom that I've gained in my life. Use it as you may. And then I feel fine about that. I gave you what I had to offer. I stood here in my best self right now as hopefully a light to be like, hey, people do think this way. They can behave this way. And then that's it.
That's all there is. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what you have to do. And it's not your job to make them understand what you think they need to understand.
Right. And I can forgive you for being on a different place in your journey.
Right.
Because, we all are.
And to know that, yeah, exactly. We're all in different places, and the situation might look a little or a lot bit different from your perspective.
Right.
Who am I to sit here and say,
right,
this is how I think you should be behaving, this is how I think you should be responding. Right. I can only control what I let around me. Good stuff. Forgiveness.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not. This was a good one. This has given me some things to think about in terms of forgiveness. You want to draw a card for us?
Sure. All right. Let's take a deep breath together. And we will set the intention that we will receive exactly what we need from this card pull and this podcast today. And maybe we are inspired to forgive ourselves for the maybe unhealed younger versions of ourselves. That we're willing to see that today we are living in our best self.
Yes.
Okay? Our most wise self as it stands today. But that'll change too. This is the patriarch. And underneath the patriarch says unapologetic.
Oh!
So I think we're going to get a little other side of the story here as we look at
They're this. Like, you bitches were too forgiving in your forgiveness episode.
What this says is, what the overarching of this is, I owe no apology for walking in my power. Which I do think speaks to forgiveness, because we can forgive ourselves for when we didn't walk in our power, but I owe no apology to anyone for standing in my power and standing in my truth and being authentic, which also means that at times in your life when you were standing in your power then, where you were at a different space in healing, you didn't need to apologize for that. So we can forgive it, right?
Ah, yes.
I'm going to read this part of it because it will resonate. Act as if you are regal. Act as if you are powerful. Act as if you are wise. That is a different frequency than fake it till you make it. You have no need to fake anything. Your arteries and bones remember the royalty in your DNA.
Interesting. I know I always say fake it till you make it, and Amber doesn't like it when I say that. But, it was so interesting when you just read that. I wonder, when I am saying faking it till I make it, do I really mean just step into your power and trust that it's yours?
Yeah.
Until it starts to really feel like it's yours, That's interesting. That gives me something to think about, the fake it till I make it. All right, guys. Well, do not fake it till you make it.
Right.
Until next time, step into your power. Know that you have the power. And we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. We would be honored if you would like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.